I'll never forget the moment my world shattered. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of evening that had once been filled with laughter and warmth in our home. I had come back from a long day at work, looking forward to a quiet dinner with my wife, Sarah. Instead, I stumbled upon a reality I never thought I would face. The front door was slightly ajar, which was odd. I pushed it open, calling out, "Sarah, I'm home." The air was thick with an unsettling silence. I stepped inside, letting my bag drop to the floor. The living room was dimly lit, the flicker of the television casting shadows around the room. My heart raced with anticipation, but not the good kind. I felt something was off. As I walked through the hallway, I heard muffled voices coming from the bedroom. Curiosity piqued, I approached the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I leaned closer, straining to make out the words. At first, it sounded like laughter, light and carefree. But then I heard a name. "Jake," she said, her voice dripping with a kind of intimacy I hadn't heard in years. It hit me like a punch to the gut. Jake, our personal trainer, the man I had trusted to help us both become healthier, stronger. In that moment, I felt the ground beneath me give way. Betrayal washed over me like a cold wave, leaving me gasping for air. I stumbled back, my mind racing. How could she do this to me? The anger bubbled up inside, a fiery thing that threatened to consume me whole. I had to know the truth. I pushed the door open, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There she was, entangled with Jake on our bed, their bodies entwined in a way that was meant for lovers, not for a husband and wife. My heart shattered, pieces scattering across the floor like glass. I stood frozen, a silent witness to my own betrayal. They looked up, eyes wide with shock. Sarah's face turned pale, and Jake, well, he had the audacity to look smug. "Mark!" Sarah exclaimed, scrambling to cover herself with the sheets. The shame and guilt etched across her face felt like a betrayal layered on top of betrayal. "I can explain," but I didn't want to hear her explanations. I felt rage boiling inside me, a tempest that threatened to overflow. "Explain what?" I spat, my voice trembling with fury. "How you've been sleeping with the man I trusted to help us." Jake, ever the coward, quickly put on his clothes, eyes darting between Sarah and me. "Man, this isn't what it looks like," he stammered, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He was a fool to think he could talk his way out of this. I didn't want to hear his lies. I turned on my heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind me. The sound echoed through the empty house, a thunderous punctuation to the chaos that had just unfolded. I stumbled to my car, my vision blurred by unshed tears. I felt like I was losing my mind, my heart a raw wound that refused to heal. Driving aimlessly, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, pain, disbelief. I couldn't wrap my head around what had just happened. How could she? How could she betray me like this? The trust we had built over the years felt like a fragile glass that had shattered in an instant. As I drove, thoughts raced through my mind. I thought about all the moments we had shared, the dreams we had built together. Now they felt like cruel jokes. I had to confront this head-on. I had to make her understand the depth of her betrayal. But more than that, I felt an undeniable urge to take control of the situation. I had to make them both pay for what they had done to me. The drive home was a blur of emotions. I could barely see the road, my mind flooded with memories of Sarah and our life together. It had been a good life, or at least I thought it was. I reminisced about the day we met at that college party, the way she laughed at my terrible jokes, her eyes sparkling with mischief. We had been inseparable since then, traveling, building our careers, and even getting a dog together. But now those memories felt tainted. As I parked the car, I was struck by the weight of my thoughts. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my racing heart. I thought back to the signs I had missed, the late nights at the gym, the secretive texts she would hastily hide whenever I walked into the room. I had brushed them off, convinced myself she was just dedicated to her fitness. How naive I had been. I stepped into our home, and it felt different. It was as if the walls were closing in on me, suffocating me with memories of a life that now felt like a lie. The scent of her perfume lingered in the air, mingling with the bitter taste of betrayal. I could almost hear her laughter echoing in the halls, but now it felt like a ghost haunting me. I made my way to the living room, sinking into the couch. I stared at the empty space beside me where she would often curl up with her head on my shoulder. I remembered the nights we spent binge-watching shows, the warmth of her presence beside me. It was all gone now, replaced by a chasm of hurt and anger. I couldn't help but replay the moment I found her with Jake over and over in my mind. The shock, the disbelief, it was all consuming. I felt like a fool for trusting her, for believing in our love. I had given her everything, and she had thrown it away for a fling with a man who had been nothing more than a temporary fixture in our lives. The anger I felt was palpable, coursing through my veins. How could she be so careless? How could she betray the vows we had taken? I had always been there for her, supporting her through thick and thin. I had made sacrifices for her career, and this was how she repaid me. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through our pictures. There we were, smiling at each other, lost in our little world. But now those images felt like a mask for the truth, an illusion of happiness that had been shattered. I couldn't stand it. I needed to confront her to make her understand the pain she had caused. But deep down, I knew that confrontation would do little to repair the damage. As I sat in the dim light of the living room, I felt a surge of determination. I wouldn't let her get away with this. I had to take control of the situation. My mind raced with ideas, possibilities. I thought about Jake, the man who had stolen my wife's affections. He had to be confronted, but not in the way most people would expect. I wanted to make him suffer just as I was suffering. What if I could turn the tables? What if I could make Jake disappear from her life entirely? The thought was intoxicating. I could pay him off, convince him to ghost her, to leave her confused and alone. It was a plan that felt both thrilling and morally ambiguous, but I was beyond caring about morality at that point. I needed to see her squirm, to feel the weight of her choices. I envisioned her face, the look of confusion when Jake stopped responding to her texts, when he stopped showing up at the gym. I imagined the questions that would swirl in her mind. Why? What happened? The very thought sent a thrill through me. She had made her choice, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. As I sat there, the anger began to morph into a cold, calculated resolve. I was no longer the victim. I was the one in control. I would make sure that she felt the pain she had inflicted on me. I would make her understand how it felt to be betrayed, to have the ground pulled out from under you. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of clarity wash over me. This was my chance to flip the script, to turn the tables on the two people who had betrayed me. I would not be broken. I would be the one with the power to decide their fate. The next morning, I woke up with a lingering haze of anger and determination. I had hardly slept, thoughts of betrayal swirling in my mind like a storm. I needed a plan, and I needed to act fast. I couldn't let Sarah's infidelity fester like an open wound. I had to take control, and that meant confronting Jake. As I sipped my coffee, I replayed the previous night's events in my mind. I could feel my emotions harden into resolve. I thought about how Jake had betrayed my trust, not just as a husband but as a friend. He was supposed to help us, to support our journey toward health and fitness. Instead, he had become the architect of my heartbreak. I pulled my phone out again, staring at Jake's contact information. I had saved his number when Sarah first suggested we hire him as a personal trainer. I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the screen. Could I really do this? Could I confront him and make him pay for what he had done? The thought of Sarah's confusion, her desperation when she realized Jake was gone, propelled me forward. I needed to make him disappear from her life, ghost her, as if he had never existed. I could already imagine her calling him, texting him, and receiving nothing in return. She would be left to question everything, to feel the weight of her choices pressing down on her like a heavy blanket. I took a deep breath and dialed Jake's number. It rang twice before he picked up, his voice casual and carefree. "Hey Mark, what's up, man?" I felt a surge of anger at the sound of his voice. "We need to talk," I said, my tone icy. "Sure, what's going on?" he asked, but I could hear the hesitation in his voice. I could feel my heart racing, the adrenaline pumping through my veins as I prepared to confront him. "I know about you and Sarah," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos churning inside me. There was a brief silence on the other end. "What are you talking about?" he finally replied, but the defensiveness in his tone was palpable. "You know exactly what I mean," I snapped. "You're sleeping with my wife. I saw you two together." I could hear him swallow hard. "Look, man, I didn't mean for it to happen like that. It just happened, you know? Just happened." I echoed incredulously. "You think that makes it okay? You think you can just waltz into my life and take what's mine?" He stammered, trying to backtrack. "I never meant to hurt you. Sarah and I—" "Stop right there," I interrupted, cutting him off. "This isn't about feelings. This is about consequences. You're going to stop seeing her. I want you to ghost her completely." There was a pause, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. "You can't be serious," he finally said, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "I can't just—" "Yes, you can," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm offering you a deal. I'll pay you to leave her alone. You won't contact her, won't respond to her calls or texts. You will disappear from her life." He hesitated again, and I could sense the wheels turning in his mind. I wasn't just offering him a way out, I was offering him money for his silence. "How much are we talking?" he asked, his voice suddenly more serious. I had anticipated this moment. $5,000, I said, the figure rolling off my tongue easily. "You can take it and walk away. No questions asked." 5 grand. He seemed to consider it, and for a moment I felt a flicker of hope. "Why would you want to do this?" "Because I can't let her get away with this. You think she'll be happy with you. You think you're going to build a life together. She made her choice, and now I'm making mine." After a long pause, he finally relented. "All right, I'll do it, but you better come through with the money." "Don't worry, I will," I replied, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. I had taken control of the situation, and I felt a thrill at the prospect of watching Sarah's world crumble around her. As I hung up the phone, a wave of mixed emotions washed over me: guilt, satisfaction, and an unsettling sense of power. I was no longer the victim in this story. I was the one pulling the strings, the one determining the fate of my marriage and the man who had betrayed me. Now it was time to wait and watch. I had set my plan in motion, and soon Sarah would feel the consequences of her actions. I couldn't wait to see the look on her face when she realized that the man she had chosen over me had vanished from her life. The days that followed my conversation with Jake felt like an eternity. I was a man on a mission, and every moment was filled with anticipation. I had set my plan in motion, and now all I could do was wait. I felt like a puppet master, pulling the strings of my own tragic play. I knew Sarah would be oblivious to my machinations for a while, but the thought of her confusion excited me. I imagined her reaching out to Jake, only to be met with silence. The very idea sent a thrill through me. I kept replaying our last conversation, the way Jake had agreed to my terms. It was all falling into place. A week passed, and I watched her from a distance. She was still going to the gym, still keeping up her routine, but I could see the subtle changes in her demeanor. The laughter that used to fill our home was replaced with an unsettling silence. She was beginning to sense that something was off, her brows furrowing in confusion as she tried to reach out to Jake, only to be met with radio silence. One evening I came home early, feigning a casual demeanor as I walked through the door. Sarah was sitting on the couch, her phone in hand, scrolling through messages. I could see the frustration etched on her face. "Hey, how was your day?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. Same old," she replied, not looking up from her phone. "Have you heard from Jake?" "I texted him earlier, but he hasn't responded." I felt a surge of satisfaction at her words. "No, I haven't heard anything," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Maybe he's busy." "Busy?" she scoffed, finally looking up at me, her eyes narrowing. "He's never this busy. He always responds within minutes. It's like he's fallen off the face of the earth." I fought to keep the smirk off my face. "Maybe he has other clients to attend to," I suggested, feigning innocence. "Yeah, maybe," she muttered, her voice trailing off. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, the realization dawning on her that something was indeed wrong. The days turned into weeks, and Sarah's confusion grew. I watched her frantically scrolling through her phone, sending messages that went unanswered. She was becoming increasingly agitated, and it felt good to see her squirm. I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. She had made her choice, and now she was facing the consequences. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I heard her voice break through the silence. "Mark, can we talk?" I turned to face her, trying to mask my excitement. "Sure, what's on your mind?" "Something's wrong with Jake," she said, her voice shaky. "He hasn't answered any of my texts in weeks. I'm starting to worry." Worry, I echoed, trying to keep my tone neutral. Why would you worry about him? Because I care about him. She snapped, her frustration boiling over. He was more than just a trainer to me. I thought we had something special. Special, I questioned, a hint of mockery creeping into my voice. You mean special enough to cheat on your husband? The words hung heavy in the air, and I could see the color drain from her face. That's not fair, Mark, she said, her voice trembling. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, I replied, my anger bubbling just beneath the surface. You made your choice, Sarah. You chose him over me. Now you get to deal with the consequences. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and for a moment I saw the realization wash over her. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a step closer, my heart racing with adrenaline. You think you can just play with people's hearts and not face the repercussions. I'm not going to let you walk away unscathed. Mark, please, she pleaded, her voice breaking. You don't have to do this. I made a mistake. I want to fix this. Fix it? I scoffed. How do you plan to fix something that's already broken? You wanted him, Sarah. You wanted that life. Now you're going to feel the emptiness when he's gone. Her expression shifted from disbelief to desperation, and I could see the tears welling in her eyes. You're being cruel, she said, her voice trembling. No, I'm just giving you a taste of your own medicine, I said, the satisfaction coursing through me. You wanted to play with fire, and now you're getting burned. I turned away, leaving her standing there, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. I could feel the rush of power surging through me, the thrill of control. I had turned the tables, and now she was left to deal with the consequences of her actions. As I prepared dinner, I could hear her muffled sobs from the other room. It was a bittersweet symphony. Part of me felt a pang of guilt, but mostly I felt exhilarated. I had taken control of a situation that had spiraled out of my hands, and now it was time for Sarah to confront the reality she had created. I had set my plan in motion, and soon the fallout would be undeniable. I could hardly wait to see how this would all play out. The days after my confrontation with Sarah were a whirlwind of emotions. I watched her as she spiraled deeper into confusion and despair, and I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt. She was becoming a shell of the woman I once knew, and while part of me reveled in her suffering, another part couldn't help but feel a twinge of remorse. It had been over 2 weeks since Jake had vanished from her life, and I could see the toll it was taking on her. She had gone from the vibrant, lively woman I fell in love with to someone who seemed lost and broken. I caught glimpses of her sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the television, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, waiting for a message that would never come. One evening, I came home from work to find her curled up on the couch, tears streaming down her face. The sight struck a chord within me, and for a fleeting moment I hesitated. Was I being too harsh? But then I remembered the betrayal, the way she had laughed and flirted with Jake, the way she had thrown away our life together for a moment of passion. Mark, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to do. I can't reach him. I thought he cared about me. I felt a surge of satisfaction as I watched her crumble. Maybe he didn't care as much as you thought, I said, my tone cold. Her eyes filled with hurt. You don't understand, she pleaded. We had something real. I made a mistake, but I thought we could work through it. Work through it, I echoed, my anger flaring again. You think I can just forget what you did? You think I can pretend like everything is okay? She looked at me, her expression a mix of desperation and anger. You're being cruel, Mark. You're punishing me for something I regret. I want to fix this. I want us to go back to how things were. Back to how things were. I scoffed, my heart racing. You can't just erase what happened. You've broken my trust, and trust isn't something you can just rebuild overnight. I watched as her shoulders slumped, the fight draining from her. I know I messed up, she said, her voice shaking. But I'm willing to do anything to make it right. Anything. I challenged, stepping closer. What does that even mean? You want to grovel? You want to beg for my forgiveness? You should have thought about that before you decided to sleep with Jake. The tears kept falling, and I felt a pang of guilt twist inside me, but I pushed it down, focusing on the satisfaction of her suffering. I had taken control, and I couldn't let that slip away now. As the days turned into weeks, I began to notice subtle changes in her behavior. She was becoming more withdrawn, often sitting in silence, lost in her thoughts. I could see the weight of her guilt pressing down on her, and it was both gratifying and painful to witness. One night, I found her sitting on the edge of the bed, her head in her hands. I approached her cautiously, unsure of what to say. "Sarah," she looked up, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "I don't know how to move forward," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I feel so lost without him, and I know it's my fault." "Maybe you should have thought about that before," I replied, my voice laced with bitterness. "You had everything you wanted and you threw it away." She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I know. I can't change what happened, but I want to try and rebuild our life together. I miss you, Mark." Her words struck a chord within me, and for a moment I felt a flicker of regret. But then I remembered the betrayal, the pain of discovering her infidelity, and the way it had shattered my trust. I couldn't let myself be swayed. "I don't think that's possible," I said, my tone firm. "You've made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences." I turned away, leaving her to grapple with her emotions. I felt a sense of power in my decision, but it was accompanied by a heaviness in my chest. I had taken control, but at what cost? Days turned into weeks, and I continued to watch as Sarah struggled to come to terms with her choices. I could see the toll it was taking on her. She had lost weight, her eyes were hollow, and she seemed to be slipping away from the woman I had once loved. But I couldn't allow myself to feel sorry for her. She had made her bed, and now it was time for her to lie in it. I had set my plan in motion, and I was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. As I lay in bed at night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing a part of myself in this process. I had become a stranger in my own home, a man consumed by revenge and anger. But I pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the satisfaction of knowing that I was the one in control. In the end, I had to remind myself that this was about justice. She had betrayed me, and now she was facing the consequences of her actions. I would not back down. I would not let her escape unscathed. The weeks dragged on, and the weight of the situation pressed heavily on my chest. I had orchestrated a cruel game, and while I had relished in the power I wielded over Sarah and Jake, I was beginning to feel the emptiness that accompanied it. I watched Sarah struggle with the fallout of her choices, and as much as I had wanted to see her suffer, the reality of her pain was becoming harder to bear. One evening, as I sat in the living room, I noticed her sitting across from me, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. It was a stark reminder of how deeply she had been affected by the absence of Jake. I could see the regret etched into her features, and it struck me that I had succeeded in my plan. She was suffering. But at what cost? "Mark," she said softly, breaking the silence that hung heavy between us. "I can't keep living like this. I'm sorry for what I did, but I need you to understand that I want to make things right." I looked at her, the woman I once loved, and felt a flicker of something within me. Perhaps it was compassion, or maybe just a yearning for the life we had built together. "You've said that before," I replied, my voice steady, "but words don't mean anything without action." "I know," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want to try. I miss us." Her words hung in the air, a plea for redemption that I hadn't expected to hear. I had taken pleasure in watching her suffer, but now I was faced with a decision. Did I really want to continue down this path of revenge, or was it time to find a way to heal? I thought about the nature of betrayal, how it had twisted our love into something unrecognizable. I had been so consumed by anger that I had forgotten the moments that had once brought us joy. I remembered our laughter, our shared dreams, and the love that had once been the foundation of our relationship. "Sarah," I said slowly, weighing my words carefully, "I've been so focused on punishing you that I lost sight of what we once had. I don't know if we can go back to how things were, but I'm willing to try if you are." Her eyes widened, and for a moment hope flickered across her face. "You mean it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do," I replied, feeling the heaviness in my heart begin to lift. "But it's going to take time. Trust is something that needs to be rebuilt, and it won't happen overnight." "I understand," she said, nodding earnestly. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I'll show you that I'm committed to making this work." As I watched her, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. I had taken control in a way that had caused both of us pain, and now it was time to find a path toward healing. I didn't want to be the man who reveled in revenge. I wanted to be someone who could forgive and move forward. In the weeks that followed, we began to navigate the difficult waters of our relationship. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension and trust was slow to rebuild. But I could see the effort Sarah was putting in, the way she was working to regain my trust. We started to communicate more openly, sharing our feelings and fears. I found myself remembering the reasons I had fallen in love with her in the first place, the kindness, the laughter, and the passion we had shared. It was a long road, and I knew we had a long way to go, but I was willing to take that journey with her. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, I took her hand in mine. "I want you to know that I'm committed to us," I said, looking into her eyes. "But we have to be honest with each other, no more secrets." She nodded, squeezing my hand tightly. "I promise, Mark, I'll never betray your trust again. I want to be the partner you deserve." In that moment, I realized that while the scars of betrayal would always remain, they didn't have to define our future. We were both flawed individuals who had made mistakes, but we also had the capacity for growth and change. As the weeks turned into months, we began to heal. We sought counseling together, working through the pain and resentment that had clouded our relationship. Slowly but surely, we started to rebuild the foundation of trust that had been shattered. I learned to let go of the anger that had consumed me, and I saw Sarah making strides to become a better partner. It was a journey filled with ups and downs, but we faced it together, hand in hand. In the end, I realized that revenge had not brought me the satisfaction I had thought it would. Instead, it had only deepened my pain. Forgiveness was harder, but it was also more rewarding. As I looked at Sarah, I saw a woman who was willing to fight for our love, and I felt a renewed sense of hope for our future. We were still a work in progress, but together, we were learning to navigate the complexities of love, trust, and redemption. And as we faced the dawn of a new day, I knew that while the past would always be a part of us, it was the future that truly mattered.